24-minute meeting can be boiled down into 3 minutes that capture the dilemma that faces Connecticut towns, whether to honestly and candidly speak truth to power about state housing mandates implied by 830G, or to quake in the fear of the threat of Hartford's tyranny.
But the idea that Ridgefield will ever achieve a 10% goal is nonsense. Who the hell are we kidding? And why do we want it?
Exactly.
But this plan, it seems to me, I think it's exceptionally comprehensive and nicely done. But I don't think it's emphasized enough the reason that we're all around this table. And that reason is 8-30G. And let's not kid each other. If there were no 8-30G, we'd be shaking each other's hands saying, Jesus, can you afford rent this month? Yeah, well, I'm going to squeak by a realtor. You don't have affordable housing, you walk away. And that would be the end of it. But the very fact that we're working towards a moratorium says to me that Ridgefield doesn't want 10% affordable housing because we can't afford the concomitant, which is the other percentage of market rate housing. And we don't want to ruin the town by doing that. At least I don't. But it seems to me that there is a disservice done to us when the paragraph says that achieving, given the limitations of available land and the cost of development, it is highly unlikely that Ridgefield could achieve the 10% threshold. I think we ought to say something in there about could achieve or should, or feels that it should. The majority of residents feel that we should achieve 10%, because we don't, I think the majority of us does not feel that we should achieve 10%. And if we don't feel that, we ought to say so. We ought to be out front about it. And then you go on to 8-30G and what the state is telling us we damn well have to do. And tell the state how we hope we can plan to achieve that goal. And I think there are ways that we can think about that and to make some sense as we talk about it. But not if we've got this bugaboo about going for 10%, because it's a bugaboo.
Right.
Yeah. John, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think I would say to the state, nor should we achieve it. I don't think that that level of frankness is to anybody's benefit, and only looks for somebody to focus in on you and try to enforce what you don't think you should, as opposed to what you can, or.
All right, I'm not going to go to the top of the hill on that one, but I think that if we're not going to say something about that the town doesn't think we could, I mean, you could actually say why we don't think we could, because it will mean God knows how many other units of housing there are.
Yeah, no, and saying why you can't is.
I know you understand that, but it doesn't seem to me candid to say that it's highly unlikely that Ridgefield could achieve the 10% and leave it at that. It's not only highly unlikely, it's impossible, virtually. And I don't think we should leave the impression that this is something that we'd like to work towards, but we think it's unlikely we could achieve it even if we work towards it. I don't know that we want to work towards it.
Well, no, you're speaking.
I agree with you, John.
The unedited 1 hour and 24-minute meeting follows.
It is 7:32, so thank you all for being here. I appreciate your coming out on a night that you don't normally do. It's an important topic, however, and I thought that it would be good for all of us to get together and talk about it so we can hear our questions, our views, our statements, modifications. I'm going to ask the chair of the Affordable Housing Committee to do an overview based on the public hearings that took place, the input that was received, and the changes that are reflected in a report that's dated June 23rd, which I think you all have, whether you have a hard copy or on your laptop. So unless there's anything else on the board, any questions, any statements before we get started, I'll turn it over to Mr. Goldenberg to do an overview for us all.
Thank you, and thank you everyone. This is a milestone in the process, because we're now at the point where we can come close to making final changes and maybe even approving the plan. As you know, this is the second draft of the plan. The first draft of the plan was submitted for review in May. There was a lot of comment. We heard comment from the Board of Selectmen. We heard comment from Planning and Zoning Commission. We heard lots of comment from the public. And then we took all the comment and we sat down and we worked through the plan and incorporated as much as we could. We did not incorporate absolutely everything, but we incorporated almost everything, at least that we heard from the Board of Selectmen and the Planning and Zoning Commission. The one thing that stands out that we didn't include was priorities. And the reason we did not include priorities, even though they had been asked for, is that, number one, we're at risk of saying, all right, let's just do only one thing, and then when we exhaust this, let's go on to the next thing. And the other is that in order for this plan to be successful, we're going to have to work on all tracks. So there's some low-hanging fruit, there's some fruit at the top of the tree we're going to have to reach for. There's different areas of responsibility, and we'll all work at the speed that works best for us. We'll all set our own priorities, but that's why we did not include priorities in the plan. The most...
Oh my God. Wow.
Ben, see what you did?
Oh, you entered.
Wow. Are we all set now? Chuck?
All right, is anybody drifting off there? The main change was we removed the specifics, referring to specific sites on specific projects. We applied a lot of the specific language that had been recommended by planning and zoning, which provided us with a very complete list of requests. We condensed a lot of the front matter. And so that's basically it. It doesn't look shorter, but it is 4 or 5 pages shorter. We condensed a lot, section 9, which is the recommendations. So that is, and then we voted on the changes, and then we redrafted the plan to accommodate all the changes that we made. So this plan has been approved by our committee for submission to you for consideration.
And just for the public to understand, that the approval process would be for both the Planning and Zoning Commission, Chairman Hendrick is here, and the Board of Selectmen to vote approval of this plan when we feel appropriate. Go ahead. That's it?
That's it.
Wow.
Did your committee, was a unanimous vote? Or
Yes.
was it?
Good. Is anyone else on the affordable housing committee comment on anything?
Yes, I do. I have this table.
Just so the public,
sorry,
because
Lori
we're streaming
Mazzola.
this.
Lori Mazzola.
Thank you, Lori.
Housing unit equivalent points. Deborah asked if this could please be put into the plan. Also to include the POCD and the West Cog Affordable Housing Toolkit as an annex, I guess.
In the appendices,
In the
yeah.
appendices,
Yes,
yes. I'll give that to
Is
you.
everyone okay with that? Have you had a chance to look at the West Cog regional report, bunch of statistics?
I thought we had it in as a link already.
It's a link. We're
So-
not going to actually include the whole plan.
Right.
It's a link to it.
Right, but that's already there, I believe, right? So we have, you know, most people are gonna look at this plan online, I would assume. And there are links to both POCD and the West Cog plan already there.
And the housing unit equivalent points. She wanted that.
Well, this is a list of how housing unit equivalent points are calculated
In 8-30G.
under 8-30G moratorium sections, which everyone would like us to, yeah.
Yeah.
The appendix, we're still assembling stuff for the
Well,
appendix.
does planning and zoning feel that that should be included, the point values and how that's calculated?
How it's calculated should be, but it's a fungible figure, so
Yeah.
we should codify it as a figure.
And actually, I've been looking through the numbers, and some of them need to be changed. Some of them are not accurate.
Oh, in that chart?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not in this chart, I mean in the
In the
last,
one that,
the last list.
yeah.
list.
Yeah, so I've been trying to go through it, but haven't had enough time to,
I know, it's hard to calculate points for things that haven't been
And
built.
when you do
well,
speak,
not those, but the ones that have been built even, some
Oh.
of them were not accurate.
Alice, can you identify yourself because
Yes,
we're
sorry.
reading this and. want
Alice
people
Dew,
to
I'm
know.
Director of Planning and Zoning in Ridgefield.
Right, thank you. Okay, so Lori, was there anything else?
That's it, thank you.
That's it? And there's a link, so everyone's happy with there being a link.
Yep, that's fine.
All right, are there any other comments from the Planning and Zoning Commission or the Board of Selectmen on this? Questions?
I had a question about the number that was used, I think it's on page 26, on the survey amount, because we had 940 responses.
1,000?
Pardon me?
9,400?
No, we had 940,
Oh,
and then there's 9,000 households, so I just want to clarify, because my understanding of the survey was that it was an individual person who was responding, so that would be, so we're kind of comparing people to households, like if one person responded, we're crediting them with an entire household. So I don't know if that's the correct way of portraying the survey, if it was just, because if it was 940 for the 25,000 people that we were, 20,000 adults that we have in Ridgefield, it would be a much smaller percentage of the people that responded.
3 people in the household that responded to the survey.
Yeah, and I looked through the survey, there was nothing in here that asked you to identify, you did have to say whether you were a single family or a renter, but there was no question, are you the only person, are you responding for your entire household? So I just want to be careful that we're not overly portraying the numbers. I want to make sure that we're using apples to apples, and the other thing with the survey was there are certain questions in here, and I was surprised that a lot of people just chose not to answer. Like there were some questions that only 100 people would answer, and 700 decided not to, and others 400. So it wasn't completely, not that it's a big point, but I just want to make sure that it's accurate.
Get it on the record.
Yeah.
Well, when people went to fill out the survey, they were met with language that told them 1 survey per household. So please submit 1 survey per household. And it wasn't an opinion survey, so we weren't asking people how they felt about affordable housing. We were asking people about their housing situation.
Correct.
So if there were differing opinions in the household, it wouldn't really matter that much. It was very specifically about what the household's housing situation is, what their future plans are. We did request 1 response per household.
Okay, so that was my question, because it wasn't in this that was said, so that was, when it first came up on the screen, that's what the screen said?
Right. It says in the plan, the survey was widely promoted and respondents were asked to attest to their residency in town and to restrict responses to 1 per household, and IP tools were used to identify potentially unqualified responses.
Perfect, okay, thank you. Okay, great, that answers my question. Thanks, David.
Good, anyone from Board of Finance? Bob,
On page 5, you made the statement here that there's no universal definition of affordable housing. I think for purposes of this plan, we should be using the definition of affordable housing that's put out from the state.
Which one, 8-30G?
Well, it says in Connecticut, the term affordable housing is defined by statute. The state law definition, which is quite narrow, means housing that is affordable to people at various percentages depending on context. Specifically the household size, bedrooms, of the state median income, devoting only 30% of their income to housing costs, including utilities. Why wouldn't we use that statute? Because we are using, further down here, you said that, and I think, and I'll defer my question to Alice, because she probably knows this better than I do. But you did say, by definition, though, a household earning $250,000 or more a year, is spending more than $6,250 would likewise be considered cost burden, even though they're encountering no financial burden. I don't think that's what affordable. I think the affordable housing plan, because again, this is reflected in the numbers of number of people that you're stating are cost, housing cost burden, and that's not accurate, because it's really limited to the median income of the state, in the area median income. So in other words, to qualify at the 60% for a two-bedroom under an 830G set-aside, that income is $54,840. So this affordable housing plan is speaking to, making representations that, there's, I forget what the number is, but it was like 30% of the people in Ridgefield are housing cost burden. That's not a true reflection of reality. So I think we should go and use the state, the definition of affordable housing that's put on by the state. Alice, am I correct on that?
As far as 8-30G goes, it's based on state median income, which did just go up recently. I'm sure you're aware of that.
But I think what Bob's getting to is that there is, out amongst the great public, many definitions of affordable housing. And there are people who consider affordable housing that housing which can be afforded by the individual one is addressing or one is considering. And I think that it makes sense to have a standard that we can all judge by, so that when each of us is talking about affordable housing and dealing with it, we know very specifically what it is we are dealing with. There is a formula for each of these levels of affordability. And I think that's what we're going to be concerned with going forward. Because indeed, when the state says every 5 years you got to come up with an affordable housing plan, that's what they have in mind. They don't have this amorphous thing about can John and Joe afford to live at 234 Esplanade Avenue. It's, can they do so with the income that they have, that they get in this affordable range? Does that not make sense?
It certainly makes sense, especially when you're talking about 8-30G, which is the law that Mr. Russell focused on. But the definition of affordable housing is a little more broad than that, and it depends on what context you're talking about affordable housing in before you can set any clear definition. And that's why we looked at all three definitions of affordable housing. One is the 30% rule of thumb. If you're spending more, and this is generally understood in the literature on affordable housing, that if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing, regardless of the state median or local median, your cost burden, and that includes all housing costs.
That's not factually true. Because if you make $500,000 a year, you have a whole lot more disposable income than somebody that's making $50,000 a year.
So that's what, if you read on here, I'll read this out loud. The generally accepted guideline is that any household spending more than 30% of their income on total housing costs, including utilities and insurance, is considered cost burden. Thus, a household earning $40,000 per year and spending more than $1,000 per month on housing is cost burden. By this definition, though, a household earning $250,000 per year and spending more than $6,250 per month would likewise be considered cost burden, even though they may be encountering no financial challenges. For the purpose of this plan, households are not considered to be cost burdened if they earn more than about 80% of the state median income. So to your point, when we were looking at cost burden, we looked at 75 or 80% of median and below. We disregarded in terms of affordable housing.
So where is that in the plan?
It's on page 5.
No, that is, because I read that too, I know that. But where is, where you're in the plan where you stated that we have, that Ridgefield is, a really high percentage of, because it's implying that, everybody is, that is, 30% were all cost burden. And you use that in your numbers, because you said, because you broke that down into actual numbers.
Page 12. So there are two sets of charts here. The one on the left looks at cost burden for owners and renters in the town, the county, and the state. The one on the right is more granular, and as you can see, it breaks it down by income category, right? So if you look at those charts, we deleted from our calculations households earning $75,000 or more.
All right, so you're telling me that in Ridgefield, housing cost burden for renters, we're at, what are these numbers here? We're at 53%, 23%, and
That would be the 582.
Well, if you read the text, as reported by the Partnership for Strong Communities, an estimated 2,775 Ridgefield households, or about 31%, are considered housing cost burden. Now, I know there's concern about this coming from Partnership for Strong Communities. These are town data profiles. It is strictly census data.
So according to this, 11%.
11% of owners and 11% of owners and 19% of renters are severely cost burden. So, and
But
then,
Dave, can I,
sure.
from a 30,000-foot level, a lot of us people in our community look at affordability from a lot of different points of view. To me, affordability may be, my kids can't afford to come back here because there's no middle income housing. That's not affordable. That's a whole different level. This plan, 8-30G, and it's, I guess, a question more to the PZC Commission members. 8-30G requires the plan to address J requires the plan to address G,
That's right. That's right.
correct?
That's correct.
And nothing else.
That's correct. And I was going to mention that I think the objective of this plan, under the statute, is to accomplish the policy goals of 8-30G. Right? That's the purpose of the 8-30J plan. So I think, I do actually agree with Bob's point that for purposes of this plan, I think you want to define affordable housing the same way the state does. It's our goal in this plan, it should be our goal under statute, that this plan is achieving the affordable housing goals of 8-30G. So
Yeah.
it makes sense to use that definition, even if, of course, I absolutely agree with you that the concept of housing affordability is broader, but this plan should really be addressing the state definition. Because the plan is for the state, is under the state statute.
Okay.
To achieve the statute's goals, the policy goals of the statute.
Right, and it talks about meeting the needs of people as described under 8-30G,
Yeah.
which this plan does.
Yeah. But I think we're getting into maybe our, our own personal views on that, on the
We
types
talk
of
about
affordability.
definitions
The
of
plan,
affordable
yeah, the
housing.
plan itself is intended to achieve the affordable housing goals as defined by the state.
Absolutely, but that's not the only definition of affordable housing.
No, I
There are
agree.
lots of aspects of affordability, and that's why in the beginning of this plan, on page 5, we look at the definitions, which are that there's the well-understood 30% threshold, there is income restricted affordable housing. Now, that's generally under 8-30G, but 8-30G is not the only applicable statute. There are some local statutes, and there are some federal statutes that apply as well to particular loans. And then the final one looks at something called NOAA, naturally occurring affordable housing. So it's another way to look at affordable housing. So although we've looked at housing from all these perspectives in the plan, our goal is to drive our main goal is to drive additional deed restricted and assisted housing. And that's what the plan talks about, especially chapter 9.
As well as traffic and the other types of.
Right, those
the
are
other
considered
ones attached.
assisted.
Okay. Right, they get counted by the state.
Right, there's deed restricted and there's assisted. CHAFA and Section 8 are considered assisted.
let me move on beyond that.
Before we move on, do we agree that we should be looking at a clear definition of 8-30G.
Of affordable housing.
Yeah, I wonder if you could have something where, you still list this, right? So, these are, appropriate,
There's some of the
fair to
things that
show.
tie into that.
But something that says, but ultimately, we're geared towards and focused on the state definition
Right.
that is X, Y, Z. Is that a good compromise, right?
Lead with the second one,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and comment about the other
But
two.
there's other ways to think about it as well. Yeah, that seems fair.
Goal of the plan should be to focus on the second one.
Right.
Right.
So with any plan,
So move number 2 to the first on page 5. And you want to make, I think, a comment about that number 1 and number 3 are laudable types of affordable housing to go after, but they don't achieve the state's, they don't get counted by the state, so they're not achieving the policy objectives of the state statute that requires this plan.
Do they, it doesn't mean they're irrelevant
Yeah, I'm not saying they're relevant at all.
for analysis, but in terms of, yeah, okay.
They're not.
But should they be in a state plan if they're not part of the state, of the mission of this plan to be an answer to what the state's asking us to do? And if there isn't, you know what I mean? Like, is it just superfluous that we're adding?
I don't think it's superfluous at all. People ask us about naturally occurring affordable housing all the time, and they ask us what affordable housing is all the time. And every one of these definitions is correct.
Okay.
But we certainly, I mean, I understand the change you want us to make, and the focus of of almost all of the recommendations in Chapter 9 are based on achieving those specific goals.
I also,
Okay, but
I
it's-
think that this document is, as much as it is a plan, it's also a tool to educate people. And so, to Dave's point about these, what's today number 1 and number 3, they are important. They're part of the big conversation that regularly, regularly gets into it. So it's important to have them in the document.
Right.
So people can understand how they fit into the big picture. They fit in as important, but unfortunately not counted by the state.
Got it.
Isn't it also
Okay, with
correct,
any-
oh, sorry. Isn't it also correct, like the NOAAs could be transferred into documented units? So it's, I think it's great to have them on the record because they could easily be transformed, like ADUs and,
okay, with any good plan though, you want to have a stated objective. What is the stated objective of this plan? I didn't see it in here. Again, I may have missed it. But what is the objective?
What is the objective of the plan?
Yeah. What's the objective? What are we trying to accomplish with this plan? And what's the end game, the end result?
8-.
Well, we're required to do it by the state.
Well, we're required to do it, but for what are we trying to accomplish in this plan?
We're trying to identify and create opportunities for more affordable housing.
Okay,
I
and
think it's enumerated on page 32 possibly.
what is it, 33?
32, it's 8.2, setting an achievable goal. And we list 3 different ways to approach it, one of which is to do nothing, one is to make zoning changes, and one is to be proactive.
I think I'm specifically asking more generally about the objectives of the plan. And every time the state has to complete one, and the objective for all of them is the same. But I'm certainly not opposed to adding a page of objectives.
I
Well, I
think,
think,
actually, it is sort of referenced on that same page 32, but it's in the first sentence. Ridgefield could achieve a 10% threshold. I mean, again, maybe I'm being lazy here, but I go back to the state statute. The 830J is part of the act that whether or not we like it, the state has defined 10% threshold as the goal. We could sit here all day long and argue that that's not a good goal, but the state has defined that as the goal. And the plan should be, I think, to achieve the policy objectives of the statute. And I know that seems long off and hard to get to, but that's the cards we've been dealt.
So I was gonna say, so I was with you until you said our plan is to achieve that. That may not be achievable, or maybe the town does not want to achieve that. I could certainly get behind saying, progress towards that. But I think I think somewhere in here, I know we've heard discussions that, it may not be, it may even be on the page, that, getting to that 10% may not even be achievable in, certainly 5 years.
Yeah.
And if it were achievable, we shouldn't be there, because it would mean the town would be ruined. period. And if we don't admit that, we have a responsibility to provide many different kinds of housing, and affordable housing is certainly prime among that group. But the idea that Ridgefield will ever achieve a 10% goal is nonsense. Who the hell are we kidding? And why do we want it?
And this plan doesn't suggest we do.
No, exactly. But this plan, it seems to me, I think it's exceptionally comprehensive and nicely done. But I don't think it's emphasized enough the reason that we're all around this table. And that reason is 8-30G. And let's not kid each other. If there were no 8-30G, we'd be shaking each other's hands and saying, Jesus, can you afford rent this month? Yeah, well, I'm gonna squeak by a realtor. You don't have affordable housing, you walk away. And that would be the end of it. But this is 8-30G, and it is a state mandated requirement that we sort of gather around it and try to find a way to present to the state a plan that they will accept. It doesn't say we've got to have 10%. It says we've got to go to 10% if we want to get off their list. But we can get off their list in a couple of other ways. Some of them we've already done in one sense, and we're maybe working towards another. But the very fact that we're working towards a moratorium says to me that Ridgefield doesn't want 10% affordable housing because we can't afford the concomitant, which is the other percentage of market rate housing. And we don't want to ruin the town by doing that. At least I don't.
But John, you know, we're trying to meet an unachievable objective of 10%. And Alice, again, help me out with this. I heard, again, I haven't verified it firsthand, but I mean, the state isn't really even offering, they're getting a moratorium. If it's not impossible, it's next to impossible getting a moratorium. Would you experience?
It's become much more difficult, yes.
Okay, and again, with the new legislation that was passed, I think it's even more difficult.
Right, but I don't think any small town could achieve 10%, just
Right.
big cities, because of the infrastructure, the lack thereof in this town as well as other ones about this town's size. So they're just, I think they're just asking that the town make an attempt to show that they're trying to accommodate affordable housing, not necessarily reach any benchmark.
Yeah, that was sort of my point before, that I don't think we should say at all that our goal is to get to 10%.
Right.
If we don't think that's realistic and possible and desired. But that said, we can make progress. Right? We can go and we can, find avenues and you have the number later on about 125 units. Either that's the right number or not, I'm not exactly sure, but that I could absolutely go behind. But I wouldn't want to say that our plan is, or this plan or any plan at this point is trying to get to that 10%.
It does say it's highly unlikely that we would achieve it.
But under the section of the
And what are we working to? I mean, that's why I'm going back to the
It's a state,
well,
that's right.
I know it's a state law, I know it's a state law, but we have to be specific on what with a plan, because we're gonna be held to this plan.
No.
No.
No? Okay, then
That's just a guideline for direction.
HB 6107, an act concerning the reorganization of zoning enabling act on the promotion of municipal compliance. And there's several things in here, but one is, this legislation that was passed in the last session says requires the Secretary of the Office of Policy and Management to convene a working group to study municipal affordable housing plan and zoning regulations. So it's the study and enforcement of our affordable housing plan. So whatever we put in here, this has to be, again, it's a plan, but we've got to be, I think, a little tighter and more concise and a little more transparent is where
Could you repeat that again? I don't think I heard the word important. You summarized important.
Restructure zoning enabling act for clarity, promote the purpose of the Federal Fair Housing Act, provide an administrative mechanism to promote compliance with municipal affordable housing plans, require the Secretary of Office of Policy and Management to convene a working group to study municipal affordable housing plans and zoning regulations.
That's the idea about enforcement there, it seems like encouragement and support.
But they're going to study how, I guess, to develop compliance.
But where do you think this is taking us?
Can I ask a question? Do you see this as any different from the POCD? I mean, it's a very similar document. It's a study and it's a setting of a direction. It's not an enforceable plan. I mean, it's a guideline for how we can achieve some goals. I don't see it as any different from the POCD. Do you?
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Okay.
Well, the POCD, although a POCD is mandated every 10 years by the state, it focuses on a broad panoply of issues.
Right.
This does not. This focuses expressly on housing as well as might. But it seems to me that there is a disservice done to us when the paragraph says that achieving, given the limitations of available land and the cost of development, it is highly unlikely that Ridgefield could achieve the 10% threshold. I think we ought to say something in there about could achieve or should, or feels that it should. The majority of residents feel that we should achieve 10%, because we don't, I think the majority of us does not feel that we should achieve 10%. And if we don't feel that, we ought to say so. We ought to be out front about it, while we allow that we indeed are trying to achieve a more affordable housing stock in the town of Ridgefield, affordable under 8-30G. And I think we ought to leave out all the other affordable. We can say in the plan, affordable housing means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Here are some of the things it means, and do it in about that much. And then you go on to 8-30G, and what the state is telling us we damn well have to do. And tell the state how we hope we can plan to achieve that goal. And I think there are ways that we can think about that and to make some sense as we talk about it. But not if we've got this bugaboo about going for 10%, because it's a bugaboo.
Right, right, yep. John, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think I would say to the state, nor should we achieve it. I don't think that that level of frankness is to anybody's benefit, and only looks for somebody to focus in on you and enforce, and try to enforce what you don't think you should, as opposed to what you can, or.
All right, I'm not ready to go to the top of the hill on that one, but I think that if we're not going to say something about that the town doesn't think we could, I mean, you could actually say why we don't think we could, because it would mean God knows how many other units of housing there are.
Yeah, no, and saying why you can't is.
I know you understand that, but it doesn't seem to me candid to say that it's highly unlikely that Ridgefield could achieve the 10% and leave it at that. It's not only highly unlikely, it's impossible, virtually. And I don't think we should leave the impression that this is something that we'd like to work towards, but we think it's unlikely we could achieve it, even if we work towards it. I don't know that we want to work towards.
Well, no, you're speaking.
I agree with you, John. And this plan is taking us to work toward that with the projects that we've discussed, that are, being talked about that are out of the plan, the specific projects out of the plan. But that's the intent.
I disagree. I think you're speaking for some of the population, but not all of the population. And all this is doing is outlining a bunch of opportunities that could maybe happen and that people can consider. It's not setting anything in stone. It's not making anyone do anything. And you're speaking for a certain portion of the population, but not all of the population. So I'm fully comfortable with the plan as it is.
I respect your opinion.
But you do have to remember, once it's codified in a plan and it's written down, to Barbara's point, I mean, once you start writing things down, it's done.
Okay.
So yes, I understand that, people might not take the POCD,
Yeah.
and analogizing this to the POCD, people take the POCD pretty seriously.
Right, but
It's been, but it's been used in many different discussions that we've had on many different levels. So the POCD says this, and the POCD says that. and it's pointed to. So once it's down, and I'm not saying that it's wrong or right. I'm just saying it's a very good point to make sure that what we have written down, we do feel that we can either achieve it or, you know, we feel strongly about it.
And it will be used.
It will be used.
By
It'll
either
be
developer
used by
or against the developer.
Exactly.
And that's what it is intended to be used, but it's not, it may not be enforceable in that if we don't achieve certain things, I don't see necessarily a slap on the hand or a penalty, but absolutely, I think you're right there, that, and especially the Planning and Zoning Commission, as we see applications come in, to the extent applications conform with the plan that we have in place, that's a pretty good piece of support for an application.
It is.
So it
So
will
to
be
say
used.
that it doesn't matter is
That's what it's
not-
designed to do.
I'm not saying it doesn't matter, not at all. I'm saying that, well, just for the example, the other night in our meeting, the POCD was referred to as not regulatory, and it did not need to be followed. So I'm confused, honestly, but anyway, yes, of course they'll be referenced, but they're not regulatory, and it's of course referenced. It's not, it doesn't matter. It's not that it doesn't matter at all. It's just that I think people feel threatened by this when I find it in a non-threatening document, but that's my perspective.
Yeah, to be clear, the plan isn't getting to 10%, right? The plan, there's nothing in the plan that says, I know the statement is there, but when you look at, the specifics and the number of units, that's not anywhere near 10%, right? Like another math, but that's nowhere near 10%. So I don't think, I don't see there's a whole lot of conflict there. I think, John raises an important point, and as Barbara does, that, how direct you want to be to the state about that. I actually kind of like the idea of saying, we don't think or want it to be achievable, but I appreciate your perspective that you need to hit them over the head with that.
Well, we do say in here that it's unlikely
Yeah.
that we
I thought that
can
was
achieve
fine.
10%.
Yeah.
Personally, I thought that was fine.
I do too, as long as you don't say you shouldn't.
And we also set our own goal, which is separate from the 10% goal, looking for the next 5 years. And, I mean, we on the committee think it's a fairly modest goal, and it's achievable.
Hey, one of the, just one thing that somewhat related to this, just given some of the feedback I heard, because I went to almost every single public session along the way. There were some people who were saying it would be nice in here, and this I can support, to very specifically say that, our town, just as you say, we want it to be our plan, not your plan. Can we have something a little more forceful that says, our town doesn't exactly appreciate 830G, right? We would like to, idealize opt out of 830G or whatever the right language is, but just being specific about that. That, we don't feel like that is supporting our town and our community. We understand the state perspective. So I know a number of people have mentioned that, so I wonder if that furthers, John's point and others, I think, that, we don't love this 10%, not to say, hey, we're never gonna do it, we're not gonna get there, we don't wanna get there, but just to say, this is a reflection of what we heard in the feedback.
Well, it does say that we do have the feedback section where we present some of that, but are you saying that we should say as a town, we don't like 8-30G?
Well, I think you could say, Dave, that 8-30G, as conceived, did not take into account the realities that exist via infrastructure and other things in small towns across the state.
And did not allow for counting as affordable under the statute, those units that could be proven to be leased for less than or at the
Right.
affordable housing rate. And we do have a number of those in town.
But they're not dangerous.
Well,
They're not.
Not enough to satisfy the need or certainly the statute. But we do have affordable housing in town that is not registered. And there must be ways to get that registered. I think David.
there are some ideas in the plan.
Certainly address that in the plan. But I think that from the town's perspective, heading in that direction to satisfy 8-30G is better than trying to pretend that we're ever going to achieve 10%.
Well, maybe what we can do, and this is something that I've talked with some officials about, and there's some interest in it. We have, on one hand, 8-30G weighing down on us with results that we don't like all the time, much of the time. And then there is this plan that is required that has no review, no compliance. It's as though we're working on in metric and inches at the same time. Wouldn't it make sense to say that as long as you establish meaningful, concrete goals and you show progress towards them, you should be exempt from 8-30G. And
We've been told that's why you have a moratorium.
But that's a very different, moratoriums have been here for a while, but this would grant the town sort of a preemptive moratorium. You have a moratorium unless you demonstrate you're not working towards your goals. And the goals would have to meet certain thresholds. And that, people who I've spoken to say that's a reasonable way to reform 8-30G. I think it would be better for us to make a suggestion for improving 8-30G than petulantly saying, don't tell us what to do.
That's your personal. If I could say something, I'm afraid to call attention to it. If we bait them, like Rob said, it may send up a red flag and then they come after us. If we say we're against 8-30G, it just gives them
As a
reason.
chief elected official, I'm serving in a lot of statewide meetings. Most of towns our size and smaller are totally against 8-30G.
Do they put it in their plan boldly?
No, because 8-30J doesn't call for that, right? It's very specific in what we're supposed to do. I think what you're saying is correct, but there are other avenues that we have to address this and put pressure on elected officials, et cetera, et cetera. And unfortunately, the cities control the legislature. And as the cities, if you look at the COG report that a lot of people have referenced, there's a chart in there that's very interesting. And it shows the number of increased affordable units from 2002 to 2020, I think it is, 18 years, 20 years. All of the Stanford had over 2,300 more, and all of the cities had the greatest increases in the number of affordable units, which is exactly what 8-30G was to alleviate. And I don't see it working. And that's an obvious example of what 8-30G isn't doing. It isn't taking people out of the city because that's where the transportation is, that's where the jobs are. That's it. And people aren't going to move to Ridgefield for an affordable unit just because it's affordable and they still have to commute to Bridgeport or Stanford or wherever they're working.
And the way the city's got to get where they are is through density, which is a word that frightens a lot of us. I'm not alone in that. But density is where the savings are. And to achieve anything like 10% of affordability, this town would have to have a population that is so dense, and we would have such crowding on the land that we now have, particularly the land that may in fact today be allocated toward mobile family housing, that we wouldn't recognize the town. But that's where the Stanford figure comes from, Stanford's density in housing. You put up an apartment building and you've got 60, 70 units stacked on top of each other.
But we had this conversation years ago relative to our grant list percentage of non-residential tax revenues we have, and we covered 12 to 15% depending on values. A lot of people said we should be increasing that to 20 or 25% to help reduce the tax burden on the residents. But if you do that, you're going to change the way our town looks. And no one wants that. So we need to find that balance, and I think the same exists here. We're never going to get to 10%, but we do have to do a plan to be legal with the state of Connecticut, and that's what we're here to do, a plan. I don't think what Ridgefield puts in its plan is even going to be read.
So, but if that's the case, we could say our plan is, what if we do nothing?
But that's why so many towns just said, just take the COGS plan, write a one-pager, and submit it. We're trying to do a little bit more. We're trying to take an honest approach to it. And I respect the people here who have volunteered their time to do that. I want to thank you for that.
No, but I think that's what we're trying to do is put together a concise, realistic plan that's transparent, and it tells us exactly, what our objectives are. And
Well, the plan requires the objectives to meet 8-30G, right?
No, I think it could be.
How are you gonna get there? What is your 5-year, 10-year, that's what the plan is.
Well, that's the plan, but the objective is to, yeah, and I think, again, I'll be very frank, what I'm concerned about, there's so much ambiguity in here, there's so much, you know, information in here that's not necessarily even pertinent to Ridgefield. It's not a tight plan. I guess one question I have is, has this been reviewed by an attorney? Are we going to be subjected to any kind of lawsuits based on this in here?
I don't know, I can't be municipality that apply, but, you know,
Well, I think
some of what you were saying in the ambiguity, a lot of people criticized the COG plan for that, because it was so general, and it wasn't specific to any
I read some of
municipality.
the COG plans. I read Newtowns. I read,
Well, it was the COG plan, I don't know what the other towns did, I'm just talking about Western Connecticut Council of Government toolkit.
right.
Put out.
Yeah, but these towns use that toolkit.
Eight of them did in our COG.
Right, and I looked at those plans, and they were actually pretty good plans. And they were 8, 10, 12 pages long.
Right.
And it was,
That's all you need.
I mean, you could understand it, you could see what their, you know, what their objectives are, and they're specific to addressing the 830G, you know, requirements. I think that, yeah, I think the West Cog plan, it looked as though it was, you know, put together by, you know, at least with consultants that have planning background or planning.
Yeah, Charles Biddich has been a
Yeah,
planner in the state.
and this is not a plan to me. This is a narrative, and it's not a plan. I mean, and I just,
So I would argue that, you know, so there's a lot of background information. So I know the POCD has a lot of background and data, but when you get to sections 8 and 9, like, to me, that seems like a plan.
Right.
That's about 11 pages of, it seems, that's
well,
not
let's boil it down to the 11 pages where people can understand it and will read it, rather than, because there is, again, I'll be very candid here. You know, I went to most all of the meetings, and most all of your meetings. I went to, you know, some of the P&Z meetings, and it's, and I've heard you say, Dave, because and you actually objected, okay, when we talked about, somebody brought up and talked about the priorities. And you don't want to put priorities in, and you did even say that as soon as this plan is over, you know, you're moving forward with Prospect Ridge project. And you said that at the end.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Keep it unpersonal.
Okay, but I'm
This is going to be an effort upon, you know, with the planning and zoning commission, board of selection, the affordable housing committee has other members.
okay, I appreciate
With
it.
respect to that point, yes, we were in the process of evaluating the Prospect Ridge property. We put that on hold to finish the plan. Once the plan is submitted, this committee, unless we're ordered not to, is going to be moving, or decide not to, will be moving forward with that feasibility study. The feasibility study is partly done. For Prospect Ridge.
Again, that's my concern, because we're moving forward on a project
That's
that,
not in the plan, that's not.
I know you took that out of the plan because of the defect that you got. But the spirit of the intent is to move forward with a project like that. And I'd like, if that's the case, if that's really what we're gonna do, then we should put not that project in there, but that should be a part of the objectives or the detail of what you're doing, which is specifically, you know, where our goal is to develop, 75 units or 125 units of proper, or units that are going to be limited, income limitations to 60% of the state median
But
income.
Bob, you're saying you don't want that.
No, I'm not, I'm saying something different.
Look at page 32, because isn't that exactly what's there?
It does say that. The plan has that in.
No, I understand that, but what I'm saying is, I'm not making myself
You
clear.
told us to take it out. I told you to take it out.
I wanted you to take out specific projects, but in reality, okay, we want that out, okay, because we don't want to be tied to it.
Yes, it's on the plan. If you want us to not work on it, that will have to be a separate decision from the Board of Selectmen.
It's out of the plan now.
But it's not that,
It is.
but it's not a reminder for everyone, so the committee came to this board and asked about applying for
Board of Selectmen.
this board, I'm sorry, Board of Selectmen, to apply for the grant for the feasibility study. We voted for one, but this Board of Selectmen voted in favor of getting that grant, which you received. I'm surprised that you would be surprised that it would go forward with that feasibility study.
No, I'm not. I said at the time that they were going to go forward with that feasibility study, and that before they go forward with that feasibility study, this board and should have had we should have agreed that we want to do something. We want to use that property for affordable housing, and then take it to a town meeting. Okay, and in concept, but now we're going to spend $50,000 of taxpayer money to do a study.
No, it's grant money, but it's
Grant.
taxpayer
It's
money, I know, but it's from the state of Connecticut.
But that's separate from the plan.
And feasibility doesn't mean you're doing something. Feasibility means you're studying whether or not something is reasonable to do. It isn't a conclusive determination. I mean,
Well, we're off topic now, we're getting away from the plan.
If you don't mind, maybe I'll just jump in on behalf of the Planning and Zoning Commission for a second. For the record, we have 7 members of the Planning and Zoning Commission here, so we're only missing Commissioner Serena and Commissioner Conley. We have all over 7 here. I'll try to make a couple of comments on behalf of everybody. Since we have so many, they can jump in if they have their own thoughts. I took a moment, and I know some other commissioners did, but I looked at your plan and actually compared it to our recommendations, which were sent via letter to you. And just to confirm, I think, in my read, you absolutely did make progress on, we had 3 major recommendations too. One was to condense and to remove the specific projects. You did both of those. We also recommended prioritizing. I personally, and I don't know if the rest of the commissioners can speak, but from my personal perspective, I understand your point about prioritization. When I thought, from my perspective, speaking of way with my commission, when we made the thoughts about prioritizing, for me, it was about focusing on the low-hanging fruit, emphasizing where you could make progress quickly. That does not mean, to me, completing one thing before you start on the second one. It doesn't mean necessarily going in sequence. I see, what I think I heard tonight is you don't want to prioritize because you feel like you need to start on multiple initiatives at once, and I think that comment makes perfect sense.
I mean, I think prioritization is the natural next step in the process. What can we do, what's easy to do?
Where can you get the most impact quickly? That absolutely makes sense. So I appreciate, even though you didn't prioritize, I think you're doing it for the right reason, at least in my view, and other commissioners can speak. There were just 2 small things, Dave, that I noticed you didn't catch, and I don't know if it was just an omission or whether there was a different reason, but on the form-based codes, section 9.1.5.
Okay.
I'll get you that.
It's page 36.
36, thank you. And to be honest with you, Dave, I don't know if this was in our letter, but it's certainly kind of in the spirit of what we commented on. Form-based, I think our commission is very interested in form-based principles and considerations. The form-based codes, strictly speaking, still have, I think, a lot of people on both sides of the equation in terms of having improper uses in certain buildings, et cetera. So the concept is very good, and I think that we would probably be more comfortable with that action item. And I'm trying to focus on action items, because to me that's the heart of the plan. By the way, I'm not dwelling on a lot of the text in the beginning, but I would rather see the Planning and Zoning Commission should consider the possibility of introducing form-based consideration for form-based principles rather than code and selected. And I would take out the selected areas because it's again about introducing the concept of form-based planning to me. It's not about actually putting a form-based code into certain targeted areas of our community. That's one thing. Again, other commissioners can speak if they disagree. The other thing is, we made a comment about the Housing Trust Fund, which is 9.3.4. And again, I respect if you have a different thought, but I think we made a specific recommendation rather than where the action is page 39, the RAHC should pursue further exploration of the Housing Trust Fund. I know it might sound like a nuance, but I think we were more interested in the word investigate rather than pursue because there's so many question marks on how that gets implemented. Pursue makes it sound like we're going to get it done, and I think a couple of members of our commission wanted to see a word like investigate, which shows
Investigate exploration?
investigate, further exploration, or further explore, maybe just take out, pursue.
Just take out exploration, should investigate the housing trust.
Maybe just should explore further a housing trust fund. I think there was exception, I remember, and by the way, it was Commissioner Sorrento who's not here, so I'm trying to speak for him. I remember he in particular was, and I think a couple others agreed, that we just want to actually kind of circle back with the details before we just get it done.
That's fine. I think what we wanted to avoid was saying, consider investigating the possibility of exploring. I mean, sometimes we just back it so far that it makes no sense at all, but I think that's fine.
There's just two other things I'll mention really quickly, and again, take them for what they're worth. And by the way, this is new, just when I did my last read of this draft. It caught me suddenly, and maybe I didn't find it, but there's a lot of reference to multifamily housing, and I don't think in the plan we actually define multifamily anywhere. You didn't, like we just had this whole debate about affordable, what is affordable?
Right.
I think we have in our regulations a definition for multifamily, but I'm not sure that everybody, and by the way, I'm being very honest here when I say the reason it dawned on me is because it actually took me a minute to sit back and say, when we think about multifamily, we're talking about condominium buildings, we're thinking about attached dwellings, we're thinking about garden apartments. I had to force myself through that thinking, and I think it might be helpful in your document, somewhere right in the beginning, to say, there's a lot of reference to multifamily in the document. And so how do you define that? Maybe you define it based on a
That's another complicated one because, for example, the census defines townhouses as single-family housing attached. So it's one of those things where it's a little unclear, but I think most people understand what multifamily housing means in a general sense. And of course, there are statutory definitions of it for our regulations. What would you prefer that we did?
Well, just to simplify, because I know thought I would maybe just use the definition that we do have a definition in our planning and zoning regulations for a multifamily dwelling, which is a building designed and occupied exclusively as a residence for 3 or more families. This definition includes condominiums, cooperatives, townhouses, and garden apartments. Now, I'm sure some people would say that's not a great definition, and we need to probably change our regs. But you're asking, the reason why I think this is important is because you're asking, and I know we're supportive, I think, of doing a lot of investigation how we can expand multifamily housing in different zones, et cetera. So then, are you asking me to expand based on the definition that we have in our regs? Or are you asking us to think?
No, I think we're talking about just more than more than single-family housing.
Okay.
In that general sense.
So in that case, would ADUs qualify under the multifamily definition that you have in this plan? Because they wouldn't under our regs, and that's the disconnect.
Right. So this is the.
But they should.
I'm talking more generally about multifamily housing versus single-family housing.
Planning and zoning commission, or more rightly, the zoning commission, did not adopt a regulation that included two-family houses, for example, as multifamily, because we have a lot of do have a lot of two-family, and we want a lot of two-family. And that does not, in our definition, nor in society, constitute multifamily housing. Multifamily housing, as I think most people understand it, is many units of housing on one site. And multifamily housing, by definition, in our regulations, always requires a special permit. So the precise number of units to be built comes to the table and comes to the public for scrutiny and debate. But multifamily housing does indeed have a state definition as well as a town definition. It is more than 2 units of housing together.
whether it's garden apartments or whatever Dave rattled off over there. Okay, it's still multifamily housing. So my only point to you is that if your view, i.e. if the plan's view, if your committee through this plan wants to see us expand multifamily housing in a broader way than Mr. Katz just described, then I think it would be helpful to actually have your own definition of multifamily housing in your plan, because that way we can actually pursue what you would like us to achieve. Otherwise, we might find ourselves trying to expand our multifamily opportunities under our definition, and it's just a gap. It's one of those things that really frustrate us later, because we think we're doing the right thing.
Right.
So that wasn't set out in the plan.
If on page 34, 9.1, we have an introductory that talks about the definition of multifamily, and about how there are different definitions of multifamily, and you just clarify what we're talking about. Okay? Look at that.
And actually, my last small comment, and this is, again, I realize different people have different, it's very complicated and different interpretations, but it's actually on the same page 34. We go through the whole description around Ridgefield zoning regulations permitting single-family dwelling in all residential zones. It's important to note that group homes are also allowed in all residential zones as of right. And of the 10 residential zones, 6 actually allow for multifamily development, 4 by my count. 3 of those allow during initial development, that's SDR 20, MFDD, and ARHD. And 3 of them allow through the kind of multifamily conversion. So I believe, based on my kind of double checking of this, that it's only the 3 zones, RA, AA, and AAA, that don't allow multifamily conversion, or don't allow some form of multifamily, and they allow ADUs. So one could argue, somebody else could argue that actually all of our residential zones allow for some type of multifamily housing.
Except that an ADU isn't multifamily under
Well,
our own
that-
regulations.
Well, then that's not, that's why I tabled, what's the definition of multifamily? Because if you have, if somebody considers an ADU, making it a multifamily, which Ms. Manners just said she does consider an ADU to be a multifamily property, then I could say we do allow multifamily on every parcel, every residential parcel in town.
So a little bit of preamble about what multifamily is and some clarification in that 3rd paragraph about where it's allowed.
But generally, again, just to kind of underscore, I think overall, it's a great plan. I know you all did a lot of hard work here, and I personally appreciate it, the whole commission appreciates it. And we're ready to get behind the action items. Again, we really focused most of our own work and discussion on the action items, rather than, I know a lot of people have questions about the background and whatnot, but we didn't spend as much time, I think, as a group on the background. We spent more on the action items. Thanks. Anybody else? I don't need to speak for everybody, but let's get it out there.
I agree with Robert. I just, buzzed through the Reddings plan that was based on the Westcog. I mean, it seems like an incredibly similar document with less words. It's not any different. I mean, it's saying the same stuff, just with less words. So I don't really feel like it matters if we go to the Westcog. The result is similar, right? It's very close.
It's
to
more
the same thing.
specific to Ridgefield, I think,
Oh,
than
yeah.
Westcog document.
We use
More
them as a
recent.
source. We drew from them as a source. Now, we're talking about appending ours to if we would append something to the Westcott toolkit, remember, that's 130 some odd pages of analysis, including 18 towns. We have 20 pages of analysis focused on one town. So I don't understand why we would append ours to theirs. I would just append theirs to
Our
ours.
regional information,
Yeah.
I think that would be the only reason. Susan, you had a?
I was just thinking from a, perspective of if you were writing somebody writing more like a creative writing piece. I know it's hard to take things out because a lot of work was done, but would it be possible to sort of edit and instead of taking out and Xing out some of the things, take it and put it onto another document that would perhaps be just like a fluid document for the Affordable Housing Committee. Get to the point of what we need to do to satisfy the state. More condensed, more, maybe along the lines, looks like that's what they did here. But still keep the other items, once we've corrected, the edits, the technical edits that need to be there. Keep that document for yourselves, just as a working document, things to work on in your goals, but not necessarily get ourselves so involved with the state, giving so many words, and a little more to the point. So, when you're writing, sometimes you spend time writing something, you don't want to really get rid of it, and you can keep a longer script over here and keep the condensed short magazine story over here and submit that to the state. Maybe that might help focus and get the job done.
Well, the plan was cut down considerably from the first one. And the reason there's analysis in there is because most plans have that, we're expected to do it. We need to base our decision-making on something. And also for people who read the plan, they need to understand what data or what information we use, what the survey results were. So I think what you're talking about might be an executive summary.
No, not really. I just meant some of the things you could say, and we're working on, and summarize it a little bit shorter, if that's what the issue is. And
Is it too long?
Stay focused on, well, I think ours is considerably longer than some of the other ones, and it seems like what might be holding
Well,
us back.
if you consider that they're appending their plan to the toolkit, it's probably 3 times the size of ours, maybe 4 times.
So this one here, that's like writing, this has 12 pages, then they're attaching it?
They're
Is that what-
attaching it to the 130
Okay.
pages of analysis.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's just
This is the writing plan, this is writing plan. It just seems like some of the things that are, the arguments over minutia might be, if we could, if there's some things you could summarize it more, like we're working on this or working on that, rather than so much, like get to the point of what Rob said, the 8-30G.
It appeared that there were bullet points. It appeared that there were more bullet points in some of the plans that they attached to the toolkit. I agree with what you're saying.
And then
You're
the
right.
longer version, you keep for yourself, keep it on, and it's a working document for yourselves to work on goals, and you come back to us and tell us this is what you're working on. But for the purposes of the state, to not get ourselves in a bind, which came up from some people, where something might get, we don't want to get targeted for something, and then work on the items in your own committee.
So just to help me understand, the way I read it was the kind of 28 pages before you get to sections 8 and 9 is sort of analogous to the detailed section that Westcog did, and then our kind of detailed plan that, it's like 11 pages is analogous to what each of those towns are doing. So, right, so with that in mind, this doesn't seem overly burdensome to go through, data. Certainly it's very good to see feedback from the town, feedback from the surveys, some of the, the external data, census data. I personally, I didn't think that was too much of a burden. And then, again, if you think of the 120 pages or whatever that was, the 27 or so doesn't seem too bad.
That's where I look at it too. And in terms of total plans, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I agree with that. I like having this one document that stands on its own. It has specific background info for Ridgefield. You don't have to append it to anything. It's just its own plan. So I like that.
Anyone else?
I agree with it. I agree with it being customized to Ridgefield. I think that's a good idea. Having customized.
On some of the Board of Selectmen action plans, when I went through it, for example, 9.3.2, extending perpetuity, page 38 and 39. It starts on 38. I think we need enabling legislation for that. I don't know if we should be putting that in the plan. Are we asking the state to consider that? Because we cannot do anything without enabling legislation. So in other words, if the state were to allow it as an 8-30G modification, I could see us doing it, but I don't see them allowing.
Well, we can't extend it in perpetuity.
No, we can't. But we need enabling legislation.
Well, we got 8-2I.
I think the way in that one, Alice might correct me, I think that the state will count as affordable, when they count the deed restricted units, they will count based on those that are deed restricted in that year. So the way I read the plan that they've written is that we want to give a local incentive to get those deed restrictions made longer by individual actors. And you don't need a neighborhood organization to do that, and then the state would just count those.
As long as it's deed restricted, they'll
In
count it.
perpetuity, they would count them, right? There's not, so they're just counting every year, and as long as we keep those properties deed restricted, they should continue to count. That's my understanding.
Well, not all count that are deed restricted. If you're base it on area median income versus the state, it's still deed restricted, but it's not counted towards 8-30G.
But it'd be counted
It's
as long.
counted as part of the, if they have the deed restricted properties, which is different. Because you can have 8-39 as well.
Right.
And that is part of what you have to list for the state every year. But it doesn't necessarily count for HU points, is that correct?
It doesn't count from
As
those
I
corners.
understand
Unless it's a certain percentage.
It does count, because 8-30, I mean, the 80% of state median income is very specific to 8-30G. But that's not the only way. Chapel mortgage, for example, counts.
Right.
It's assisted and deed restricted. So something that's at 80%,
So it will count on the list, it won't count toward a moratorium
Right.
for the HEUs, it will count on the list every year.
right.
Yeah.
And that's still something.
I'm trying to get a little clarity through DOH, but it's,
I have Mike Santoro on speed dial.
yeah.
9.3.6 building permit fee incentives. Building permit fees are board of selectmen responsibilities.
Right.
What are you saying, that we should work together on those fees in discussion, or? Okay.
Right, obviously, I mean, it would be your decision to make, but we would work with you and with planning and zoning, board of finance, to make some recommendations.
Tito, do you like? On 9.5.4, page 42, it should be not Prospect Ridge, it should be Old Fort. On the second line, what will happen to the police and fire stations properties when those agencies
right.
relocate to Prospect Ridge? It's
The
Old
Old Quarter Road, right?
Is what we're looking at, no one's.
Maybe they should just say when they relocate.
Yeah, 'cause that's a lot of work to do before we get there. I don't know if anyone had anything else under the action items, Barbara, Maureen, Bob?
There's one or two things I had, just like math ending up, I could send separately if you want,
Sure.
Can I ask a general question while I looking at that? The email that I sent to OPM asking for the extension to July 8th. Does everyone think we're going to get there, or do I need to, because July 8th is not that far away. Okay, and we had a lot of discussion tonight, and I don't know how long the changes make. Do we have another meeting? Do we vote to modify based on tonight's discussion? How do we proceed from here as planning and zoning, as a board of selectmen, as the affordable housing, board of finance? You've been quiet tonight. But where are we going with this in the next couple of weeks?
From our end, if, let's say that everything we've heard tonight is the extent of the changes that need to be made, that could be done very day. Formatting the document to make it look good is going to take between now and July 8th. So it's going to take a bunch of work to get it to look professional and high level.
But you know we did offer help.
Yeah, oh yes,
Okay.
we're going to avail ourselves.
Okay, all right.
We just want to get the content right first.
Yeah, how people feel about that. Do you feel we should extend to have more meetings as this group? Have we beaten this to death, or what are your feelings on it? It's a plan.
July 8th is next week.
Yeah, I know. And the fourth is here. How's everyone else feel?
I think we should extend it also.
P and Z?
That seems just administratively required, it doesn't seem like you get the document done.
So you, am I hearing by the extension that we want to get another version back to review?
We have it reviewed.
Because at some point, we're gonna have to say, okay,
Yeah, I was just looking at our calendar for planning and zoning. We have a regularly scheduled meeting on July 12th. So I just throw it out there, if you happen to work next week and you have a new draft by the 12th, we could easily table a discussion within our own meeting and get a vote or whatnot, if you need a vote to endorse it or something.
An alternative view, it seems to me, might be that the state, we should figure that the state is looking to receive a document that has our work product presented to them as goal achievable. We have, planning and zoning has, and Dave has suggestions in here that if we follow through with them, we'll achieve some of what the state is asking us. We can't produce a document that's going to guarantee that we're going to achieve in one fell swoop of the first blush of this thing all that the state might expect. But I think we owe it to the state to produce a document by their deadline, now been extended, that shows the effort that the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, the town in general, has put forward towards the state requirement that we achieve a goal that they have set. I don't see why it's so hard to produce a document, this one, edited, now, and go with it. It doesn't mean we can't refine it, it doesn't mean it's cast in concrete. But there are some significant suggestions in here, which if we head towards them, we will achieve part of our goal over time. And I think that's all we can expect.
I don't think there's any problem with asking the state, I mean, you're talking about July 12th.
That's our next regular meeting.
I mean, but then again, we could have another meeting, and all of a sudden, more issues come up,
Right.
and
We
then
have-
we're up against
Edit-
the wall again.
edit-
So I want to be sure that we're all cognizant of the fact that we do have to deliver a product to the state
Right.
at some point. And if it's not going to be July 8th, what should that date be?
Another week.
That's kind of close, I think.
Yeah.
So that's not making any changes,
Well,
really,
that's-
looking from tonight.
That's looking at what they read on the 12th or the 13th. All right, so maybe you go till the end of the month.
Why, there's no penalty, we can always, we get it done sooner, we can submit it sooner, but why not give yourself the time, why don't you extend it for 30 days?
I mean, we can.
Give it to them early, it's the
It's 30
Right.
days
I don't
isn't that,
think
it's going to be here like that, believe it or not, but.
Right.
I would
And
say
I
that,
think it gives a little bit of a cushion for us all to digest, move forward, your backs aren't against the wall, hurry up, let's get it done. You get a little bit more time and we get it done.
Dave, what are we missing to make it professional?
Formatting, design, templates. Yeah, and we just have to attach the appendices.
Plus, we're also missing a letter of review, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, we can do those
That's the
relatively
main
quickly.
part.
Right. I would think that as soon as we're comfortable with the document, the letter can go into it. Or do you want it beforehand? I mean, I can certainly write something that
Whenever you're ready.
benign.
Yeah, what's,
Well, if it's not approved, I don't want to put something in there that the board says we don't agree with. That's an issue as well, so maybe the 30-day makes more sense. We can review it at a meeting and then move forward based on the review of the meeting, and then I submit the letter. I can have a draft available, I don't know.
so we could push it
Rob,
back to our
it would be
August,
you, right?
our August or our September meeting, right? August 17th, we have a meeting, or September 17th?
Going to September is really, I don't know,
We don't want to
I may get a call back.
Okay, we'll have, well then, August 17th?
Yeah, that's our next one, July 13th or August
13th or the
17th.
17th?
And your meeting is on the
We have
12th,
July.
I mean, they don't meet.
They
We
don't
don't
meet
need
in
it on
August.
this, so for
Okay.
us, it's actually, for us, the pressure's actually there. We'd rather see it.
You gotta decide.
We'd rather see it next week and move and get it behind us
Okay.
for our perspective.
You can always have a special meeting.
Yeah, we might already have a special meeting here. Looks like we might have an application.
So can we try to have a goal of?
30-day extension. Can we do a 30-day extension?
That's fine, I was gonna say, can we try to have a goal of try to vote on it the 13th, right? Because it seems like the changes are not very significant.
Right.
No, they were minor,
Right, they can come back, we can review, so if we had, you know, the meeting on it, and then maybe 30 days gives us, you know, more wiggle room. I just worry about, every time you look at it, you can find more things to talk about. And,
Right,
and, you know,
right.
spend, you know, constant edit, yeah, that's right.
Constantly and never.
So having the pressure of the vote is helpful, so if the 30 days is right, that, I'm fine with that, but let's try to be, I would set a goal for ourselves at least, is to try to vote on these, right? We don't need to vote on these together, right? So P&Z can vote on it, the Board of Selectmen can vote on it. We have a meeting on the 13th of July. I would hope that we'd be able to vote on it then.
I just, for the record, want to state that I received an email that I sent to the Board of Selectmen, and the Affordable Housing got it, or P&Z, from Mr. John Tartaglia, recommending multiple changes to the document. I don't know if you got a copy of that, I just wanted it. Okay, I'll forward it to you tomorrow morning, so you can take a look at that, but it pretty much redlines a lot of what's in the beginning of the report, I think. I read it once, quickly scanned it. But the public hearings are closed. As planning and zoning does this very professionally every week, we do it occasionally. We close a public hearing. We had our public hearings, they were closed. To begin accepting additional information. I know P&Z cannot do that under state statute. So it would be difficult now to receive recommendations from the public that would go into the report at this point. It would be up to the individual boards here either to approve or not approve. Do you agree with that or not?
Yes. That's my view here.
Okay.
It's fine, no exam time.
Okay, I just wanted to make that statement. Anything else for tonight? David, did you have anything for the Board of Finance? No section on revenue in here?
There are some revenue topics. But I guess I'll deal with this later. It's the expense topics we're working on.
You know, the people sitting here to my left, the audience is right, are all volunteers. And they've done a lot of work on this. I want to say thank you to each and every one of you individually, collectively, for your efforts and the product you put out. It's greatly appreciated. And you're going to get pluses and minuses. We all do in everything we do in government. But thank you for your efforts. It's appreciated. Is there any other comments coming for us this evening, Speedy? I'm going to entertain a motion to adjourn for our board. You have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned at 8:56. I don't know if this is a formal meeting.
Is that a special meeting for us to motion to adjourn?
Sure.